Dutch Schultz sent his most feared enforcer to break Bumpy Johnson. The man walked into Harlem with orders to intimidate. He walked out loyal to Bumpy, carrying every secret Schultz tried to bury. Dutch Schultz had a problem. Harlem was slipping, not in some quiet, gradual way. It was slipping loud. Bumpy Johnson had turned a neighborhood into a fortress, and Schultz, who controlled half of New York's underground, couldn't muscle his way in. So he sent a message, not a letter, not a warning. A man. His name was Vincent Cole's cousin, though most people just called him the Hammer. He'd earned it. Broken arms in the Bronx, shattered kneecaps in Brooklyn. He didn't negotiate. He didn't explain. He walked into a room, and people either fell in line or fell apart. Schultz trusted him more than anyone. Go to Harlem, Schultz told him one night in a back room off 125th. Find Bumpy. Let him know who runs New York. The Hammer nodded. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need details. Intimidation was a language he spoke fluently. He arrived in Harlem on a Tuesday afternoon. No fanfare, no crew. Just him, a tailored coat, and a reputation that traveled faster than he did. He walked past barbershops, where men stopped mid-conversation, past corner stores, where women pulled their children a little closer. Everyone knew what he was. Everyone knew why he was there. But nobody ran. That should have been the first sign. The Hammer found his way to a pool hall on Lenox Avenue, a spot where Bumpy was known to spend his afternoons. Not hiding, not fortified, just present. The room went quiet when he stepped inside. Not scared quiet, aware quiet. Bumpy was at a table in the back, leaning over a shot, calm as Sunday morning. He didn't look up, didn't flinch, just lined up the cue ball and sank it clean. The Hammer walked straight toward him. You Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy straightened, took his time, set the cue stick down like he had all day. Depends who's asking. Dutch Schultz sent me. The room didn't gasp, didn't panic. A few men exchanged glances, but nobody moved. That told the Hammer something important. These people weren't afraid of Schultz's name. They were waiting to see what Bumpy would do. Bumpy nodded slowly. Dutch, huh? That's right. And what do the Dutch want? The Hammer stepped closer. Close enough to make most men uncomfortable. Close enough to assert dominance. He wants you to understand something. Harlem's part of New York, and New York belongs to him. Bumpy didn't blink, didn't step back. He just looked at the Hammer, really looked at him, like he was reading a book he'd already finished. The Dutch sent you all the way here to tell me that. He sent me to make sure you heard it. Bumpy smiled, not mocking, not scared, just amused. I heard it. Silence. The Hammer had broken men with less. A stare, a threat, a hand on the shoulder. But Bumpy didn't break. He didn't even bend. You want a drink? Bumpy asked. The question landed wrong. The Hammer wasn't there to drink. He was there to intimidate, to dominate, to leave Bumpy rattled. But somehow, in that moment, refusing felt like the weaker move. Sure, the Hammer said. Bumpy gestured to a table, 2 chairs. No audience, and just like that, the enforcer sat down. Harlem wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a nation inside a city. And Bumpy Johnson wasn't just a gangster. He was the reason people could walk their streets without looking over their shoulders. The reason shop owners didn't get shaken down by every crew passing through. The reason grandmothers nodded at him on Sunday mornings. Respect wasn't something Bumpy demanded. It was something he built. Brick by brick, decision by decision. When the Irish tried to push into Lenox Avenue in '29, Bumpy didn't wage war. He sat down with their captain, laid out terms, and made it clear Harlem takes care of its own. You either work with that, or you don't work here at all. They left. When the Italians tried extortion rackets on the 125th, Bumpy didn't retaliate with violence. He protected the owners, paid their debts, then made quiet visits to the men behind it. No threats, no guns, just the truth. You take from Harlem, you take from me, and I won't lose. They stopped. That's how Bumpy operated. He didn't rule through fear. He ruled through presence, through being the man people turned to when everything else failed. Children knew his name before they knew the mayor's. The preacher shook his hand after the sermons. Numbers runners reported to him, not because they had to, but because he made sure they ate, made sure their families stayed safe, made sure the money flowed fair. Bumpy understood something most gangsters never learned: power without loyalty is just noise, and Harlem was loyal. When Dutch Schultz started making moves into Upper Manhattan, people noticed. Schultz had muscle. I had money. Had a reach that stretched across boroughs like a spider's web. But he didn't have Harlem, because Harlem had Bumpy. Schultz thought territory was about force, about who had the most guns, the most men, the most fear. Bumpy knew it was about trust. So when the Hammer walked into that pool hall, he wasn't just walking into enemy territory. He was walking into a place where every person in that room would have stepped in front of a bullet for the man holding the cue stick. Not because Bumpy ordered it, because he'd already done it for them. Bumpy had pulled sons out of jail cells, paid hospital bills when mothers got sick, made sure rent got covered when fathers lost work. He didn't advertise it, didn't make speeches about it. He just did it, and Harlem remembered. The Hammer had broken men in the Bronx, in Brooklyn, in back alleys and basements across New York. But those men were alone. Bumpy was never alone, sitting across from him now, watching him pour 2 glasses of whiskey with the ease of a man who had nothing to prove. The Hammer started to understand something he hadn't expected. Schultz sent him to intimidate a gangster. But Bumpy Johnson wasn't a gangster. He was a king, and kings don't break because someone walks into their kingdom with a reputation. They wait, they listen, and they decide whether that person leaves the same way they came in. Bumpy slid the glass across the table. The Hammer took it. I haven't drank yet. Just hold it. This wasn't how intimidation was supposed to work. He was supposed to walk in, deliver Schultz's message, watch Bumpy squirm or posture, or make some desperate play for respect. Then he'd walk out, report back, and Schultz would know Harlem was handled. But Bumpy wasn't squirming. He was calm. Too calm. You know why the Dutch sent you? Bumpy said. It wasn't a question. I know. And you know what he expects you to do. The Hammer nodded. Bumpy leaned back in his chair, took a slow sip, let the silence stretch just long enough to make the room feel smaller. So do it. The Hammer blinked. What? Intimidate me. Bumpy's voice was flat, unbothered. That's what you came for, right? So go ahead. The Hammer stared at him. This was a test. Had to be. Some kind of trap where Bumpy wanted him to make a move so his men could jump in. But the room was still. Nobody is hovering. Nobody is tense. Just 2 men, 2 glasses, and a conversation that didn't make sense. I'm not here to play games, the Hammer said. Neither am I. Bumpy set his glass down, leaned forward slightly, not aggressive, just present. You work for Schultz. I respect that. A man's got to eat. But let me ask you something. The Hammer didn't answer. Just wait. When's the last time the Dutch asked how you were doing? The question landed wrong. What? Your family? Your health? Your future? When's the last time he gave a damn about any of it? The Hammer's jaw tightened. I don't need him to care. I need him to pay. Bumpy nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer. Fair. But what happens when you're not useful anymore? When your knees go bad, or your hands shake, or someone younger comes along? The Hammer said nothing, because he knew the answer. Schultz didn't keep broken tools. You think I don't know how this works? Bumpy continued. I've seen men like you. Good men. Loyal men. Used up and tossed aside the second they couldn't deliver. I can deliver. I'm sure you can. Today. But what about tomorrow? Silence. Bumpy took another sip. Let the moment breathe. Here's the thing, he said quietly. Schultz sent you to scare me, to remind me he's got reach. But you and I both know he didn't send you because he's strong. He sent you because he's worried. The Hammer's eyes narrowed. Worried? Harlem's not falling in line. His crews keep getting pushed back. His money's not moving like it used to. So he sends his best man to rattle the one person keeping him out. Bumpy leaned in closer. That's not power. That's desperation. The Hammer felt something shift in his chest, something uncomfortable, because Bumpy wasn't wrong. Schultz had been tense lately, snapping at people, making moves that didn't make sense, spending money on wars that weren't winnable. And now he'd sent the Hammer to Harlem, not because it was smart, because he was losing control. Bumpy stood. Slowly. No threat in it. You came here to deliver a message. You did. Now you've got a choice. He walked toward the door. Stopped. I looked back. You can go back and tell Dutch I'm scared. Or you can stay. Have another drink. And we'll talk about what happens next. The Hammer sat there, glass in hand, choice in front of him. And for the first time in years, he didn't know what to do. The Hammer stayed. He told himself it was a strategy. Gather information. See how Bumpy operated. Report back with details Schultz could use. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was simpler. He wanted to hear what Bumpy had to say. They sat for another hour. I talked about Harlem, about how Bumpy built his operation, how he kept the peace without burning the neighborhood down. Bumpy didn't brag, didn't posture. He just explained. You know what Schultz sees when he looks at Harlem? Bumpy asked. The Hammer shook his head. Money? Territory. Another piece of the map to color in. Bumpy gestured toward the window. Toward the streets outside. I see people, families, futures. The Hammer took a drink, said nothing. You ever wonder why his crews keep failing here? Bumpy continued. It's not because I've got more guns. It's because every person out there knows I protect them, they protect me. Schultz can't buy that, can't force it. The Hammer had been in this business long enough to recognize the truth when he heard it. Schultz treated men like assets, useful until they weren't. The Hammer had watched it happen. Good soldiers tossed aside. Loyal earners cut loose the moment they slipped. He'd told himself it was just business. But sitting across from Bumpy, he realized something else. It didn't have to be. What are you offering? The Hammer asked quietly. Bumpy didn't smile, didn't lean in like a salesman closing a deal. He just met his eyes. Respect. A place where your loyalty means something. Where you're not just a hammer waiting to be swung. The words hit harder than any threat could have, because the Hammer had never been called by his real name in Schultz's crew, never been asked what he wanted, never been treated like anything more than a weapon. And here was Bumpy Johnson, the man he was sent to break, offering him something Schultz never had, dignity. I walk away from Dutch, he'll come for me, the Hammer said. Maybe. Definitely? Bumpy nodded. And when he does, you'll have Harlem behind you. Not just me. All of it? The Hammer looked around the room, at the men playing pool, at the bartender wiping down glasses, at the quiet, unshakable loyalty that filled every corner. Schultz had muscle, but Bumpy had a nation. What do you need from me? The Hammer asked. Bumpy's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Everything Schultz doesn't want me to know? The Hammer exhaled slowly. This was it. The line. Once he crossed it, there was no going back. He thought about the years he'd spent breaking bones for a man who'd never once asked his name, thought about the future waiting for him if he stayed loyal, used up, discarded, forgotten. Then he thought about the way Bumpy looked at his people, the way they looked back, like he mattered, like they all mattered. The Hammer set his glass down. Schultz has a shipment coming through the docks next week. Liquor, high-end stuff. He's using a new route to avoid the feds. Bumpy listened, didn't interrupt. He's got 3 cops on payroll, 2 in Midtown, 1 in the Bronx. They feed him intel on raids before they happen. Bumpy nodded slowly. And he's planning something bigger, a move on the policy banks. He thinks if he controls the numbers, he controls Harlem. Bumpy's jaw tightened, just slightly. When? 2 weeks, maybe 3. Silence. Then Bumpy extended his hand across the table. The Hammer looked at it. Then he shook it, and just like that, Dutch Schultz lost his best enforcer. The Hammer didn't go back to Schultz that night. He stayed in Harlem. Bumpy set him up in a quiet apartment on 132nd. Nothing fancy, just clean, safe. A place where he could think without looking over his shoulder every 5 minutes. For the first time in years, the Hammer slept through the night. No knocks on the door, no sudden calls, no orders barked at 3 a.m. because Schultz needed someone's legs broken before sunrise. Just silence. And in that silence, he realized how tired he'd been. Over the next few days, the Hammer gave Bumpy everything. Names, addresses, routes, payoffs. The crooked cops Schultz kept on retainer. Bumpy made quiet notes. Didn't move on them yet. Just filed the information away for when it mattered. The shipment schedules, Bumpy passed word to the right people. Not to steal, not to sabotage, just to know. Knowledge was leverage, and leverage was power. The policy bank plan, that was the big one. Schultz wanted to choke Harlem's numbers game, control the flow of money at the street level. It was smart, ruthless, and it would have worked if Bumpy hadn't known it was coming. He's got meetings set up with two of the biggest runners. The Hammer said one evening, sitting across from Bumpy in the back of a cafe, "I want to buy them out, or squeeze them out. Doesn't care which." Bumpy didn't react, just sipped his coffee. When? Next Tuesday, noon. Some warehouse off the river. Bumpy nodded slowly. "He told you to be there." "No, he's keeping it small. Just him and his top guy." "Who's the top guy now?" The Hammer hesitated. "Vincent's cousin, the one they call Mad Dog." Bumpy's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Mad Dog was vicious, unpredictable. The kind of man who'd burn a building down just to watch it fall. If Schultz was bringing him to a negotiation, it wasn't a negotiation. It was a threat. "You think he suspects?" Bumpy asked. The Hammer shook his head. "Not yet. But he will. He's paranoid. Always has been. Once he realizes I haven't checked in, he'll come looking." "Yeah." Bumpy set his cup down, leaned back. "Let him." The Hammer frowned. "You want him to know." "I want him to wonder." "A man who's wondering makes mistakes, and Schultz has been making plenty." Bumpy stood, dropped a few bills on the table. "Those runners he's meeting, I'll handle it. You stay low. Let Schultz think you're still out there doing his dirty work." The Hammer watched him head for the door. "Bumpy." He stopped, turned. "Why'd you trust me?" Bumpy tilted his head slightly, studied him. "Because you came here to scare me, and you stayed to listen. That says more about you than anything Schultz ever did." He walked out, and the Hammer sat there, staring at his empty glass, realizing something he should have known years ago. Loyalty wasn't about fear. It was about being seen. By the time Schultz figured out what happened, it was already too late. The shipment got delayed, cops suddenly interested in the docks, paperwork mysteriously missing. The policy runners never showed up to the meeting. They'd already aligned with Bumpy, and the Hammer. He was gone, not dead, not missing, just gone. Switched sides without a shot fired. Schultz tore through his own crew, trying to find the leak. Accused everyone, trusted no one. But the damage was done. Bumpy had everything, and Schultz had nothing but paranoia and a crumbling empire. All because he sent the wrong man to Harlem, and that man chose respect over fear. Dutch Schultz never recovered, not from the betrayal, not from the losses, not from the fact that his best enforcer had walked into Harlem and never walked back out. The shipments kept getting delayed. The payoffs stopped working. The runners he thought he controlled started answering to someone else, and every time Schultz tried to push back, Bumpy was 3 steps ahead because he knew everything. Schultz grew paranoid, started suspecting everyone around him, fired loyal men, brought in new muscle who didn't know the streets, made enemies out of allies. He was unraveling, and Bumpy didn't have to lift a finger. He just watched. Within 6 months, Schultz's Harlem operation was finished, not destroyed in some dramatic shootout, not dismantled in a turf war, just gone. Quiet, clean, complete. The policy bank stayed in Harlem's hands. The runners stayed loyal. The neighborhood stayed protected. And the Hammer, he became one of Bumpy's most trusted men. Not because he was the most brutal, not because he had the biggest reputation, because he understood what power really meant. He ran security for the numbers operation, trained younger men, taught them that strength wasn't about breaking bones, it was about knowing when not to. People in Harlem started calling him by his real name again, Thomas. He'd forgotten what that felt like. Bumpy never made a spectacle of what happened, never bragged about flipping Schultz's enforcer, never used it as a threat against other crews. He didn't need to. The streets knew. Word traveled fast in New York's underworld. The story of how Dutch Schultz sent his best man to intimidate Bumpy Johnson and that man switched sides, became legend. Other bosses started approaching Harlem differently, not with threats, with respect, because they realized what Schultz had learned too late. Bumpy Johnson didn't build his empire on fear. He built it on loyalty, on trust, on being the kind of man people chose to follow. And you can't intimidate that. You can't buy it. You can't break it. Years later, when people talked about Bumpy's rise, they'd mention the wars, the deals, the brilliant moves that cemented his control. But the people who were there, the ones who lived it, remembered this moment differently. They remembered the day an enforcer walked into a pool hall with orders to scare a king, and walked out knowing he'd been working for the wrong man his whole life. Bumpy never gloated, never rubbed it in. He just kept building, kept protecting, kept proving that the strongest empires aren't held together by violence. They're held together by respect. And when Dutch Schultz finally fell, shot in a Newark tavern in 1935, bleeding out while muttering incoherent confessions, Bumpy didn't celebrate. He just nodded, because he knew men who rule through fear always end up alone, and men who die alone die forgotten. But men like Bumpy, they become legends, not because of what they took, because of what they built, and because when given the choice between breaking a man and earning his loyalty, Bumpy chose loyalty every single time.